Welcome to the Keeping IT Real podcast. This podcast features honest and transparent conversations about what it takes to manage corporate technology and expenses today. Each episode, listen to true and personal stories from IT professionals who are working hard to make sure their business stays connected and competitive. I'm your host, Jethro Castillo, and let's meet our next guest. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Charles Harris Jr., the VP of IT for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the NFL football team. Dr. Charles has over 2 decades of experience implementing and supporting technology solutions across a number of industries, including transportation, education, communications, healthcare, and sports. He prides himself on process, resource optimization, and efficiency, allowing his teams to perform at their best so they can provide value to the organization. Charles, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start, like all good stories start, from the beginning. How'd you get started in the world of IT?
Interestingly enough, I always imagine myself somewhere around technology. I believe it got started. I'm a date myself a little bit, but I believe my first real introduction, like a lot of people were, is I don't know if you remember the game Oregon Trail, playing video games.
I loved Oregon Trail.
It was my first real introduction into, just working with a computer. I think somewhere in my freshman year of high school, I had taken my first basic programming class and just got lost in it. And it was kind of like, I don't know what I'm going to do in technology, but I have to find somewhere to fit up in technology. And, was able to go to school, get my education, kind of got my first actual IT job when I was in say, my junior year of college as a assistant IT manager, pretty much just, odds and ends, figuring out how to put computers together. And from there, it was the life that I chose.
Obviously, you fell in love with kind of the application of technology, the using of technology, the coding, figuring out how it works. Obviously now, years later, you're in a position where you kind of are less in the tactical and the doing and more in the strategic. Is that a shift that was natural? Was it something that you were like, yes, I want to move into management? Or was it more like, oh, am I going to say goodbye to the thing that I fell in love with first? And how has that shift really been relevant?
The experience behind that shift was I had spent a number of years being creative, and I do like the creative aspect of technology, right? It's not, everything is not lay it before you, set it up, and that's it. It's finding different ways to use it. Especially when you get into coding, you're trying to find ways to be creative to solve a solution, solve a problem. And it kind of was a natural evolution for me because I started to realize in those early days that I had not had the experience of working with a technology leader that understood people, that understood how to get the best out of people. And it kind of intrigued me on being able to be the person in that position, right? I remember my first leadership experience was actually with United Parcel Service. At that time, I was working as a technician there and got the opportunity to move into supervision, which was leading the very guys that I was working with on a day-to-day basis. And it kind of dawned on me, instead of being the guy to complain about how your manager is doing, how about being the guy that can implement and do all those things to make us better, rather than really focusing on, metrics and numbers that we have to hit. How do I help somebody be their best self at the day-to-day job, right? We all work a job. We all do it because we have to make money. And of course, there are a lucky few of us who can find something that we're passionate about. But that doesn't mean, from a leadership perspective, you can make an environment somewhere hard to come to. At the very least, let's make it somewhere semi-enjoyable. We know there's the pressure. We know there's the things that have to get done, but nonetheless, we don't have to make it miserable on top of all that. And you often find that the job can be somewhat fun if we can come together and kind of figure out how to do that. And for me, moving in these positions really helps me with that kind of imaginary point of what technology can I bring to the table, or how can we implement processes that are going to enhance the organization. And it becomes, how do I look 3 years ahead? How do I look 5 years ahead? Talking to vendors, counterparts. I find that energy giving. It is a transition from the hands on. It really is, because it's like things change and you're like, I haven't seen that. It would probably take me what used to take me an hour, it would take me probably a week to do at this point, just to get caught back up. But then you start to realize getting the right people and great people on board to help you with those things is much better.
Yeah, and I think this is a really awesome to hear, because you kind of mentioned that, yeah, you fell in love with technology, but you loved the creative aspect of it. And I think a huge part of creativity, especially if you're not in the art world, creativity is about solving problems in ways that have never been solved before. And you have to think very critically. And I think, moving forward, you were like, oh, tech can solve these problems. I'm having fun trying to figure out how to code this thing so it works. And then as you kind of dove into the world of business and IT, you went, oh, there are other problems that I think I want to figure out how to solve that I can't just do on my own. And, and I love this mentality of, instead of just going, my manager isn't the greatest. Oh, well, you kind of went, no, that's a problem that I think I'm going to try to figure out how to solve. And when it got to the point where you could be that person, you became that person. And I think that's a really cool transition. And kind of from what it sounds like, a graceful transition, a graceful move almost, of just like, I want to continue to solve problems. And this is how I want to do it.
Yeah. And it is. You teeter on that. Do I want to walk away from the technical aspect? But I feel like I can make a bigger impact from a leadership standpoint, right? And one of the big things I would always say is get to know yourself, get to know people, right? That was a transition, because what I did understand, and it's unfortunate how, and it's changing now, but in technology, we were not trained on how to deal with people. You didn't go to school and they didn't teach you how to work in groups. They didn't teach you how to command a room. They didn't teach you how to explain yourself to a layman when you're talking about this type of work that you do. So you have a lot of highly technical people who feel like everybody is just a step slower than they are. And being able to be that in between, that liaison person, is that I fully understand the frustration behind technology for a layman. And I fully understand the technology person who's like, I want to go a mile a minute and I understand what's going on, but how do I get that to you? And then there's this whole secret disconnect. So I've been through these iterations of different groups where I've picked up things like, working with software developers and doing agile, right? That was a big transition for me, because it forced me into a situation to sit my technical teams down and those requesting and help them understand how to have some synergy behind you developing this. And I used to have people come to me and be like, I didn't realize how much it took for you guys to make that. And it's like, there's an appreciation on that side. And then there's clarity for your technical staff, because they're like, oh, okay, I get it now. It's not me just doing something on my own. So it was one of those things. It's like, that was genius in just the aspect of the day to day. It's like, don't throw something over and say, this is what I need. Come sit down and help them go through the iterations of making it.
And I think this is why I am so talking to tech leaders is one of my favorite things, because you have a very unique job where in the world of business, historically, tech or IT just supported it. The communication never needed to be prioritized, even though it should have been always, right? So that people understood what it took to do that on both sides. But because they were highly technical, but most businesses weren't tech oriented. We weren't, in the age that we are now. It was just, we just need to make sure that we have our data, the servers are up and running. There's nothing you need to do to kind of help advance the business objective. And so even then, it was not even incentivized to teach technical people how to have the business conversations. But now we're at a point where everything is tech, and tech can make or break a company. It can lead to a lot of costs. It can also lead to a new business solution that can provide a lot of value to your customers or your stakeholders. And so you need those people who are able to translate both ways, the technical to the business and the business to the technical, and hearing you kind of be that liaison and realizing that the truth lies in the communication. is kind of it's a fun job. I can only imagine. Obviously, very stressful, but fun
Yeah.
nonetheless.
Yeah, and it's key from my standpoint. One of the big things I try to come into an organization to do is just like you said, is most organizations see their IT team as the cleanup crew, right? They're not necessarily the one that you want to necessarily partner with, but it's like when it's broke, we need you there. If nothing's broke, I don't want to hear from you. Just stand in the corner and wait for us. Um, and my initiative has always been with other executives is help place us in a position where we're partners. Is that on the onset of your problem, we're the first call, right? We're the ones that'll help you brainstorm about how to solve those solutions. What fits in our organization? Is it secure? Is it the right solution? And think through the whole process. Oftentimes, you'll have organizations where the department will make an idea or a solution, and then they'll come to IT and say, "Here, implement this. This is going to solve our problem." When you may not see the whole problem all the way through the process, and we're telling you there's a much easier way to solve this. Let us be able to walk you through what we know as well as what your pain point is, and then we can come to a quality solution together. And so that partnership is huge within an organization for your IT. Help them see past us being a cost center, is what's always said, and see us more as partnership as a value add to the organization is really key.
Yeah, I love that. And like we are alluding to, IT and tech is exciting. It's changing. It's moving. It's fast. What are you most excited about? And kind of at the same time, you have the nuance, right? So what kind of keeps you up at night at the same time?
Okay. Probably the real exciting stuff is it's a little cliche right now, but it is inundating a lot of time, which is AI. What that means for us, and not just AI, but you also talk about the alternate ways for definitely clubs when we're talking about biometrics and the facial recognition, the RFIDs and all that stuff. It's going to fundamentally change how people interact with our games, right? How the fans are going to interact. There's this level of expectation that's starting to go up when a lot of the different clubs and professional sports start to do these things. Fans are going to have these expectations, right? No longer can I go to a stadium and have a paper ticket and expect it to be scanned. Everybody's going to be like, that was very archaic. You can't just put a hot dog and a soda in their hand and expect them to be fully happy with their experience when they're going to another place and they have virtual reality. They have no touch shopping and walking in, grabbing their beer and grabbing their hot dog and never having to pull a phone out or anything else. So the ante has been put up, and it's up to my role to stay ahead of the game, right? What is out there? What's being done? Do you be the first? Do you be near the top? All of those great things. And I think it's exciting just to know that how you're attending a game right now will not be the same way in 10 years. It just will not. And
were you a sports? Were you huge on sports as well growing up?
Oh, absolutely. I played every sport under the sun. I don't even know if I had time off. I mean, I played everything from basketball, football, baseball, soccer. I loved it. Competition is great. I mean, it was kind of an epicenter of my life, and so now to be able to kind of merge technology
That's what I was gonna
and
say.
every home game I'm attending, sitting, watching these games and, out near the field and it's great. It's really amazing. And it's not without its challenges, right? I think the things that probably keep me up is the security. I mean, even with all this shift in technology, the creativity that's out there, between just the implementation of AI and not just the good implementation, but the fact that you can get an AI to mimic voices, you can get AI to mimic emails, solve those problems that they're trying to get in. I know I was just at a conference, and they were talking about, someone who's hacking can literally put in some key information for your organization, and AI can spit back how to get into that organization, who to call, who's the newest person there. This will probably be the easiest target to get access to something. And, with that, I think the security aspect, you never want to be the one on the front page or in the news for a major breach. And so those are the things that you're always thinking, what haven't we done? What should we be doing? And making sure you kind of keep those risks in front of your entire organization, because we're all responsible. It's not just me, but each one of us has that responsibility. So that continued training and that continued knowledge base to build with them is what's going to help keep us out of those situations, or at least at the best to minimize the impact of them and to learn from them as we go.
It's interesting that you say that. So, because, you also mentioned that with IT and tech, and especially in the sports industry, you gotta innovate. You gotta be creative. You have to stay on top of things, because you're not just kind of going, okay, our circuit's up, our device is running. We are a huge part of the experience of the game, but you also need to make sure it's all secure. So how do you balance the need for that innovation, because you need to move fast, while also maintaining that stability and that security within the IT and the tech infrastructure?
It's all about, one, the knowledge, right? We have a habit of even working with either vendors or even internally with our departments. Is my job heavily is about knowing the risk, right? And keeping that risk in front of them. Now, every organization, everywhere, even individuals, we all hold a level of risk that we're willing to hold, and being aware of that threshold, honestly. And there are some things that you kind of ask the question is, yes, there's a risk here. How do we minimize or manage that risk? And what's the future potential for mitigating that risk completely? And it's really a fine dance. It's really a fine dance of what the organization and what the value is on the other side for that new implementation, what the value is for the fan, and on top of that, being very transparent with those who are involved in the system to know that here's what the risk you hold. If you're a fan engagement and we have a system that holds some type of PI information, some personal information for these individuals, we just need to make sure that we let them know what the risk is. We make sure we let them know how we're mitigating those risks, and work very closely to manage those things. So it's really just an ongoing, constant going through your audits, mitigating those audits, making sure you have the right people on staff to follow through and to manage those areas.
Right, because the last thing you want is to be the bad guy who goes, we can't do that. We can't do that because it's going to be too dangerous. And that's just going to alienate you.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to. I mean, if the risk is high enough, sometimes you have to, or at least we have to go back to the drawing board and figure out an alternative to get to what we want. Sometimes the goal is always never to go from a place of no, but how else can we get around to doing what we need to do, right? And that's the one thing I love about technology, right? Is it's not necessarily always a no, but there's a problem to solve. Let's figure out how to solve that. It may not be the way we think it can, but there are always new ways to get around to what you're trying to get around to.
And it's kind of this recurring theme, but it comes back to that taking the time to have the conversations and coming to conclusions together, rather than just saying, this is right, this is wrong, you're bad, you're good. It's about addressing how can we get to the same or similar conclusion while keeping everybody kind of all right with the decision that's being made. How, with that being said, you go back to that drawing board, you have these conversations. How do you personally, for your team, prioritize the initiatives within your organization, especially when resources are limited? You'd love to be able to do everything. The reality is even in the sports world, especially in the sports world, some teams just got way more money than other teams, right? So there are things that some teams can do and support. I'm born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. Golden State Warriors are my team.
I love that area. I applaud you. Beautiful area. I visited often.
that, we started in Oracle in Oakland, and then we won a lot. And then we're like, we're moving to the Chase Center. And I remember, I enjoyed Oracle. It was gritty. It was grimy. Then I walked into Chase Center and I went, whoa, this is what the TV, the fact that I can order something from my phone and get it immediately. The VR room over there, I'm just like, this is not just a sports game anymore. I'm fully into a whole experience. And then I'll go back to at the same time, the Oakland A's, right? And Oco. And I'm like, oh, wow, your bathrooms stink. All of your restaurants are closed. How do you kind of deal with that pressure depending on where you're at? And then how do you prioritize and succeed with your limited resources?
So there are two things that I try to work on. There's one, there is the art of telling the story, right? Is painting that picture and helping leadership, our owners, to see where the value is and what needs to be done or should be done becomes skill one. The second is what has the biggest return on investment, right? When not just maybe dollar amount, but just value to fan engagement. And we lay those opportunities out and we try to fit them into whatever possible schedule we can. But it really comes in being able to identify what has the most return on investment and to go headlong in that, right? Because the good part about that is when you get those wins, that builds trust with your organization, right? Is, hey, we got this. This is what it was. This was the evaluation, and it went really well. And we got what we wanted, if not more, out of that implementation. And that's the plus side for an IT team, is that you build that trust, you build that confidence, and you build the organization's understanding of your vision for what we have to move forward with the organization. But it's really about just return on investment, is where do we see our value and how does that value fit in, and how can we leverage it sooner than later? Absolutely.
Obviously, and that's you prioritize the thing that makes your company the most money or saves the most money, right? Mm-hmm. But you also have to, again, like we said, balance that risk. There's a chance that this ROI could be huge, but it's risky, right? Yep. And there are times where that makes or breaks. There are success stories that literally transform somebody's life. And then there are failure stories that literally transform somebody's life. Has there ever been a time when you've implemented a project and you're like, this is the ROI, you got the buy-in, you have the trust to implement it, and then it just didn't go as planned or it didn't yield the results that you wanted? And if so, kind of what were the main lessons learned from that experience, and how do you move forward to rebuild that trust?
I've had some that did not quite match the ROI that was expected. And I often like to put that up front. If I see some areas, is I want to lay out clarity of what's expected, but what could be. But usually working with a good organization, the truth is that you're never going to get around to the big successes if you're not willing to take risk in some of those. And that's the one thing that I would lay out before a lot of organizations, is that, what is not only having the appetite for risk, but being able to know, look, we did our due diligence. And I'm not saying just go for everything and anything just to see what sticks on the wall. But if you've done your research, you've done the evaluation of what it is, and the evaluation didn't come out, at least you know how to learn from that experience, right? What didn't you evaluate that item or that thing wasn't as value add as you thought it would be? And oftentimes it really comes around, you may not have talked to the right people. Your focus on that particular project was probably more on the finances and it wasn't on the people usage, right? Or say you implemented some type of program or some type of new technology that users had to use. And your failure was you didn't talk to the users to see, does it really fit the business model that they need in particular? Of course, it may have been cheaper. Of course, it may have been, all the greatest bells and whistles, but you find out one of the key aspects to it was you didn't talk to the people. And again, that for me goes all the way back to relationship building. is if you're building relationships, from my perspective, is I almost have to have, I no, not almost, I have to have a relationship with every department. Every department, there has to be some type of connection between either myself or my staff within that, because we need to understand how you do business. If we're ever going to improve it, we can't improve it from the outside. We have to, from the inside, understand what it takes to do that job.
You mentioned that due diligence, right? It's in order for you to be able to reflect on how something didn't succeed, you have to know exactly what you did to get to that point, or else you won't be able to reflect. That's why you can't just throw things at the wall and hope they stick. You got to be able to lay it all out, so that if you lay out, let's say you lay out a project, you lay out the risks, it still gets that go ahead. And then something happens that you didn't consider, that didn't yield to the result you wanted. But because you did that due diligence after the project, one, you're not supposed to just go, I'm a failure, all trust is lost, it's over. You go, okay, it didn't work the way we wanted, but I know now what didn't happen, so I can improve that for next time. And I think that's how you still keep that trust going, right? Of just like, I'm not just here saying, I don't know what happened. I know what happened, and I just didn't acknowledge this part. And moving forward, that risk can now be mitigated because I have faced it now. Interesting. It's definitely, especially from my point of view, who doesn't really have to make the big decisions. It's always interesting to go, well, how do you not just get paralyzed and go, I don't know what to make because it's scary. I don't know what's going to happen. You gotta be okay with that risk, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And it is. It's an iteration that I think over time you start to see a lot. You start to experience a lot. Being in a number of different organizations is just, you kind of take the similarities between the situations that you've been in, and you start to implement them. I know when I came here to the Bucks, I was asked from a couple of executives, like, how do you see yourself transitioning from, which before this I was in healthcare, working for a nuclear pharmaceutical company, overseeing their IT. And the reality that hit me was IT is IT everywhere. I mean, it is. In every single company, it is the same. Essentially, there are nuances to how people do business and differences in that, right? In healthcare, you have HIPAA and, a little tighter regulations, in places that generate direct funds, you have PCI compliance with payments and everything else. So with all these compliance things, it's still the exact same. And here in our organization now, I still have HIPAA compliance. Why? Because we have players that have health information. It's just the same thing everywhere. I just have some nuances where, hey, we did this in healthcare differently. It might work here, because, it's a different aspect. I've done satellite communications, a whole different aspect, but I found so many similarities within this type of work that I feel like the variations and not just being in sports has given me an opportunity to be a bit more creative in how I view the problems, the situations, and the implementations that we do within our organization.
No. I think that's exactly it. It's kind of the idea of, if you want to, the way we transform anything is by bringing in something or an idea that has never been done before, right? We can go the tried and true, but at the end of the day, it's like why I was pre-med in college, and it was kind of like, they like people who aren't just studying science, because you have a different point of view and you will learn the science eventually anyways, but you can bring something to the table that no one else has any knowledge in, and that might move the needle in a way that we could have never even imagined before. So I think that's a really, I also love how you go back to creativity. It's always about being creative, not for creativity's sake, but to solve problems in a better way. I think that's how that's problem solving. That's business, right? To, kind of talking about that, the risk and times where projects didn't go as planned, of course, right? You are in a place where you have been successful enough to be in the situation and the position that you're in. What is kind of and it can be a successful IT project, an exciting IT project. What's a specific project that you've worked on in the past that you kind of are really proud about, that really made impact either on the Bucks organization or just in any company that you worked for? And ultimately, how did that project impact the organization?
Okay. I'm gonna go all the way back to UPS, right? And this will kind of show you my mindset on how I got to where I am. While I was working at UPS, I was still a technician there. And basically, the job we had was we would support internally our servers and our users internally, but we also supported customers. And basically, what we would do is we would go out and set up a shipping system for them. Give them, at the time, they were giving them computers, printers, monitors, everything, the whole setup. And if they shipped a certain amount of volume, there was software that we would set up and even integrate into their databases so they could generate orders and everything else. So that was the work we were doing. Every year we used to have these audits as well. And one of the big challenges we had was being able to keep a record of all of our assets. Those computers were owned by UPS, therefore they were a part of those assets. So as you can imagine, at the time I was living in Indianapolis, throughout the entire state of Indiana, we had, I want to say, thousands of computers and equipment that was out there. The original expectation was that we come back and we write down serial numbers and give it to an admin, and an admin keys it into an old Access database. That was not working very well. And so, for me, I was dabbling in software development and had found out from my manager that we had a license for Visual Basic. And I said, hey, do you mind if I go ahead and create an application that would help us maintain that? He's like, fine, as long as it's, on your in-between time between the support stuff, go right ahead. Fell in love with it, right? We had a SQL license, we had Visual Basic, so I set forward to do it. I created a complete inventory system for the entire state, right? Created an inventory system. One of the things that we had at UPS was we had the rights to generate labels, the little square labels, the dot matrix labels, and I integrated that into my application so that you could create these labels to either put on shelving or to put on the actual equipment. So in iterations, I created this complete database, had set it up as with an SQL database background. We were able to keep track of all of our equipment sitting back in our inventory, so we knew exactly what shelf it was on and what location. Shared that out with the rest of the technicians throughout in the state of Indiana, so we could generate a report to see all of the locations and ask for spares from another center if we needed spare equipment. And then we ran into another problem, right? We still didn't get over the issue of getting the serial numbers in there. So what I did is I created an applet on a USB drive where when you plug it in, you could put all that information in. And then when you unplug it, you could bring it back to your computer at your desk, and it will automatically upload the information into our database. To get even more creative, I made sure that that information was saved on the registry of the computer so that every time you revisit a location, and let's say you replaced a label printer, all you would have to change was the serial number for that label printer, and it would bring back all that. So that was probably one of my biggest and proudest moments as a creative problem solver at the very beginning. And they used that for a really long time, right? We turned that into a VB.net, and we took it off of a computer and actually put it on the web for our local intranet, and we had the entire state using it. And so we could generate reports, we could see all of our inventory, our audits were covered for that. So for me, that is the epicenter of my creative problem solving. And it was like every time they would come back with a problem, I'd be like, wait, let me think about how we can integrate that. And so it became an entire thing.
How that project's not a small project. You know what I mean? Looking back on it, right?
Yes.
The scope of it is huge. How did you know? Was it just you saw one problem and you solved it, and you just went it step by step, solving problem by problem? How did you prioritize and conceptualize how to go about solving this sort of problem?
So I'll have to say my coding on the beginning of it was terrible. It was, hindsight is like standards. I was just beginning to get into it, but I was very much good enough to do what it was that needed to be done. So I was like, you know what? Let me break down the scenarios of just storing the information. So I had to create the database structure, right? Just a relational database, and started doing that. Because it was an Access database, it was on a single computer, and we had this server, and I was like, well, why don't we all have access to it? So it just, as each problem came around, I kind of created the base, and then I was like, okay, how do we get to the next iteration? And actually I didn't know how to keep the versions all over the state up. So what I did was I actually coded within the program that every time it started, it would go to a server location where I would store the source file. And if it's seen that the source file was, the version was higher than what it was, it would automatically start that to update the new version so that everybody had it. So I didn't have to keep passing out the install. So it was just, like I said, it was step-by-step and it was the craziest thing. I mean, hindsight looking at it, I was like, it was just at each elevation, it was something else.
No, this is crazy, because it was almost like you solved one problem and you went, oh shoot, I got to solve this problem to make my job easier for this thing, and then you kept on going and going and going until at some point you're like, I got to automate the thing that I'm doing manually for this job, so I don't have to update. I need to make sure these are updated, or else it's not going to work. And all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, this small solution, this small problem became everything, and so. I get why this is kind of the peak, because it was just, you were riding this wave of, I need to solve every problem that comes my way with this thing so it works, not just for the business sake, but for you. You're like, how do I make sure that this can happen?
Yeah, I mean, it was great. You could see history of the equipment, right? If a customer left and they'd come back on the shelf, it would have end dates, and then you could be like, okay, how long we had? You could see the whole history. Every customer it went to, when it got in. We had scanners, so you could scan barcodes and put in. I mean, it was. I have to say, it was one of my crowning achievements. I would have to say, and to be honest, I think to this day, and when I say this was back in maybe 2000. Maybe back in 2000, somewhere around there, 2001. And to this day, I think they still have a version of that from the last time that I've heard, that there was a developer that came in and he kind of started updating a lot of it and everything else. But yeah, they're still running.
But I think what's amazing about that is that if you had not done that, where would the United Postal Service in Indiana be at this point, right? Because you solved a lot of major problems while trying to just solve one. Suddenly you have full visibility of inventory, not just for audit sake, but so that you can know where something is, when something needs to be updated, when somebody leaves, how to transition it. You have full knowledge of that. Yep. Where before you said you were writing the serial number and giving it to the guy and hoping that that it all works.
Yeah. Scrap of paper, put down, and if they couldn't quite read it, then it was and that's manual.
That's like really that's dependent on, that's human error galore, like just potential every step of the way. That's crazy. Yeah. And then at some point you were like, oh, I'm going to make sure that the updates are always accurate, and that's something that is just not going to be human error ever. And it's just like, you solved that problem when. You didn't even conceptualize that when you first went into that project. No, I think that's an inspiring story, and I think you should go, how can I do that again? Yeah. How can I make that change again? That's a wild story.
Yeah. No, just real quick, I have another small one that I did at the same company, right? So at the time for our centers, we used to have these major servers that every day the technicians would have to remote into each one of them, because there were some technicians that had multiple centers that they oversaw. And so those were driving distances from each other. And they would have to remote in and look at a text file to see if the tape backups had run for each of those servers. And they were like, it's time consuming because if you have about 4 locations, you got to, remote in, parse through there, see where all the success or fail, what time it happened. And I was like, one of the supervisors said, I've seen you do some development. What can you do for this? And I was like, okay, give me some time. Um, and when I was looking at the file, I realized there were key areas where you can parse data out of there. They were consistent, either labels or information there. So what I did was created a program that went out and just looked at the file, would get all the information out of that file, parse through it, and then pull forward all of the information that you needed within that big file and say success and what time or fail at what time. And so all they would have to do is just start the program, select what locations or what servers you needed, and then just say run it for these. And so every day you could just do that check in one fell swoop. And like I said, I was hot back then.
At the time, they probably went, this is magic. What is happening? Like that went from the most time consuming thing to not even a thought in their mind at all anymore. It's a huge value add. That's crazy. Yeah. That's crazy. Okay. You say, all right, you were hot then. Okay. I admit that those stories are wild. I can't even, I'm going to listen to this, back to this 100 times over. That's wild.
Yeah.
That being said, you're hot then. But obviously, that kind of mentality of yours has never gone away, right? It's always been about creative problem solving. So I'm curious now, kind of, what's the next big creative challenge? What's the biggest challenge you're facing in your role right now, and how are you choosing to tackle it?
Probably some of our big challenges right now. So our team is working on a cloud migration, right? That right there, I think, is big for us because it makes us very, very agile in how we manage our infrastructure, right? So if we have new server information, if we have things, it's much easier to spin up than to talk about how many blades we need to add or anything like that. It's a very quick and manageable aspect of us being able to kind of pivot whenever we need to, and particularly being in an area where hurricanes are a big thing, and weather can be a big thing to certain times of the year. It makes sure we can get back up as quickly as we need to. From a game day perspective, I know right now we are working on implementing facial recognition for our stadium for credential scanning. And so for the back office, we're definitely moving in that direction. And then as well, we're going to start testing out facial recognition for fans, right? Coming in with tickets, you register. You no longer have to kind of wait in the line to make sure things scan. You just kind of walk by, it recognizes your face, recognize you have a ticket, and you're off and gone. But right now, I think it's all about the fan. I mean, it really is. It's about, how do we make this experience more frictionless? How do we make it more engaging, not just for the game, but even when it comes to our food and beverage, right? We last year implemented for certain sections of the stadium in-seat ordering as well as delivery. So there are certain items in certain seats that you can sit there on the app, order, and somebody will come and bring your food right to your seat. They know right where you sit. These are some great opportunities, right? It keeps our fans engaged in the game. You don't have to stop. You don't have to wait for the vendor to come down the aisle for your beer. On demand ordering, and somebody's going to bring it. So these are the types of things that we're always sitting around kind of brainstorming. How can we make this and you're right when you say make it an experience, not a game, an experience. I want you to walk out of the stadium remembering more than just what the score was, but remembering how you felt in that moment, how great it was to be there. And I think that's the thing that's like the bar that you're trying to reach for. And for me, everything in between means that, right? How is my coworkers and the staff that is with the Bucs, how can I optimize their day so they can be more attentive and creative, right? How can I make sure that their job is a little more frictionless so that they have time to attend to a lot of those things that may not be technology related? Just, you know what? There was somebody there to greet me when I got ready to sit. There was, an engaged person involved in my event, but that's going to mean that, that we do the best we can to make their job effortless on the back end so that they can attend to those things.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm just thinking about if I go into a game and I'm craving popcorn and I can just have it whenever I want. That is I didn't even think that was a thing that could happen. I always, I'm like, when is the best time to leave the game so I can go to the concierge and stand in a really long line? I don't know when I can get my food. That's mind blowing. We mentioned priorities, and of course you're focusing on these aspects of the cloud migration, and of course this experience. Of course, right. This means that there are other things that you have to push for later. You just don't have the bandwidth to do everything all at once, and even if you could, that's kind of almost too much change for any one organization to even accept anyways. So it's kind of not even going to happen in that moment. With that being said, if we had infinite capacity for change and you had all the resources, what would be the priorities that might never happen because there are always bigger priorities, but would be nice if they were if these challenges were solved?
First, the thing I would probably really focus on is, again, where my heart is solutions development. I seek out problems. I seek out friction in order to find out how we could best position the organization to do so. Definitely a focus on our network and being able to position ourselves for like Wi-Fi 7 as it's coming around the corner for our Wi-Fi, looking at ways to engage augmented reality within some type of fan engagement. And this is like the epicenter of the dream if you had the money, the resources to do so. Those are kind of near and dear to my heart. My PhD is actually in modeling and simulation when I went to University of Central Florida to do so. And that was definitely something that the sky is the limit when you talk about those types of things and how they can be implemented within a number of different organizations. And sports and entertainment is definitely one of those big areas to do so. So I think there would probably be more efforts based on who I am and where I come from. It's just finding friction everywhere I can find and figure out how to put resources toward smoothing out those areas of friction.
For sure. And the final question of this conversation is, what are some of the most important lessons that you've learned over your career?
So oddly enough, the connection and networking was a big one for me. Because I came from the background I came from, usually developers, you sit quietly, you do your thing, and you let your product speak for itself. But what I've learned over the course of years, particularly getting into management, supervision, leadership aspect, even executive aspect, is building relationships is huge. It's absolutely huge. And I probably would have had less hurdles had I been versed in networking very early in my career, which again, from an IP perspective, nobody talks to you about that. Nobody talks to you about the connections. And I don't mean the connections from necessarily just from a career point of view, but connections from a learning point of view, right? Those varied ideas that come around what people are doing in different industries, how they're handling situations. It culminates to, if you can be a person who can take information in and process it very well, then it allows you to formulate your own ideas when you have all these ideas that come in from different connections and different relationships and different industries. And it makes for a very well-rounded thought process and solutioning from that aspect. If I were starting now in IT, I would think another big thing to focus on would probably be around data engineering and understanding data in it all of itself. It's begun to have its place in almost a software developer's place within organizations right now, and people are really understanding the asset that data has within an organization. So it's another great way for that meld of business and IT to really get an understanding. Because honestly, if you can understand your organization's data, you can understand the organization as a whole, just because it's like a hieroglyph of everything that's going on. And to be able to understand it, define it, know it, it's a huge value add within the organization. But for any young IT person out there, learn to communicate. It's everything. The technical aspect, if you're in love with it, you're going to learn it. You're going to pick it up. You're going to do it. The communication part is hard. And honestly, if anyone were to know me before, I did not like public speaking. It was the bane of my existence early on in my life. But as I continually did it, I saw the value. It became something very second nature to me. So you just you evolve with that stuff. And it was something that I knew if I was going to go anywhere, there's no need for me to be a CIO. I can't talk to my group of folks because, so it was something that I felt was very important for me. But the communication aspect, in IT, it's kind of going away just because, everything from agile groups to, people being able to understand generating requirements and everything else, you're going to have to do it. I don't care what role you're in. So that would probably be the really big one, is learn how to work in groups.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Charles, thank you so much for your time. I love this conversation. I also want to point out, you talk about telling the story, right? That's really important, learning how to tell the story. And I think, I don't know how often you hear this, but the way you speak and the cadence and the way you kind of build it up, I think you communicate very, very clearly and well, and very fun to have a conversation with you for sure. So I want to acknowledge you for the hard work you put in on that for sure, and that advice. So again, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. And I'm smiling. I'm like over the moon with this conversation. It was so fun. So thank you so much for your time again.
Thank you. It was great. You did a great job as well. It was really good speaking with you.
Thank you. All right. Take care.
Take care.
VCOM Solutions is here to help make your IT projects and day-to-day operations as easy and efficient as possible. If you'd like to see how VCOM can help your organization save time and money, request a demo at vcomsolutions.com/demo. Do you work in IT? Be a guest on our podcast. Go to vcomsolutions.com/keepingitrealguest to sign up. Thanks again for dropping in. Don't forget to subscribe, and you can find us on social media at VCOM Solutions. Until next time.